Hello, I'm Kelly Taylor Ryan, and this is Mainely Unspoken. Today our guest is Paul Mann, who is the editor and publisher of the York Independent. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, thanks for having me.
The York Independent, now this is a newspaper, a weekly newspaper out of York, Maine, and you just started this, what, 2 years ago?
2 years ago, December 15, 1999.
Bill of Rights Day.
Apparently, yeah, I'm very impressed. I should have known that.
So what made you do your own paper?
It was a confluence of unique circumstances, the kind of thing that just doesn't happen very often. I was not looking to start my own newspaper. It's not something I wanted to do because I know how much hard work it is. I was actually, it was a fortunate accident, I guess, because I was actually looking to have a soft job in the newspaper business for a little while after getting burned out writing books. I'd been writing books for 10 or 12 years.
You're an author. I can see all these books here. All right.
Yep.
And you thought newspaper writing would be easier?
Well, I had a book contract canceled on me, which I kind of thought was a blessing in disguise. I was ticked off that my contract got canceled, but I was kind of desperate for a break, and I took a break for a while, and then realized I just couldn't afford to sit around and do nothing and have no money coming in, so I got a job on the local newspaper in York, which was called the York Weekly at the time. And I figured this will be a real easy job, and I'll write books on the side, you know, when I get back to it. And fate decided that it would pick me up by the scruff of the neck and change all my plans. So I went on a vacation, and it was part of a book research trip to Europe. And while I was there, the paper was sold. And I came back. It was taken over by a big chain, a chain called Courier Newspapers.
That's the same one that owns the York Coast County Star, isn't it?
They did. They've changed hands again, which is something happens when chains pick up local newspapers, you know, put them into their little empires, and then they sell them as commodities. So what happened was a very old established newspaper, a much loved local newspaper in York called the York Weekly, was absorbed into this chain, and as also happens, superfluous people were fired, and I was one of them. So I thought, okay, well, I guess I go back to writing books a little sooner than I thought. And then some people in York came to me and said that they really liked my style of journalism because I'd raised a little hell in the time that I'd been at the York Weekly. You
raised some hell? What type of hell?
Mostly political hell. I thought when I went to that newspaper that I'd be having a quiet time, and I'd be maybe spending a day with a lobster fisherman or interviewing centenarians about, you know, how their diet kept them fit and healthy. But you see, I'd never worked in small newspapers in my life before. Before I went into authorship, I'd worked on big city dailies. And I had this image in my head that small newspapers were quiet and maybe dull, which is exactly what I wanted. But in York, the politics are very volatile, very, very volatile, and kind of a lot of fun. They're exciting, and people are always fighting with each other and disagreeing. And it's got a high soap opera element to it. And I since found that's not unusual. A lot of times, maybe it's part of you know, this feisty, bubbly democracy in the United States where people really take their rights seriously and they exercise them. You know, they really do. They expect to have their rights granted them, and they go out and claim them. And so, you know, like that Norman Rockwell, The Right of Free Speech, that Norman Rockwell painting, people go out and talk at the public meeting. And so I got thrown into this ongoing maelstrom of political conflict over various issues, most of which in York over the last few years have involved planning. York is kind of a historic town, and a lot of people there want it to keep its beautiful look and its historic identity. But it's also a town where, because it's a really quaint, pretty New England town, that a lot of people want to live. So there's a lot of developers who want to build houses for them and make money, selling the town out, basically.
So it won't be a pretty quaint little New England town.
So it won't. It'll just be another suburb of Boston in another few years, and a lot of people feel that that's what it's already become. And we have a charter in York, which is written in such a way that different boards have different powers, and it enables these boards to, they can shut the town down, they can cause roadblocks. You know, the Board of Selectmen are the policymakers for the town, but the Budget Committee can choke off the financing if they don't like a project. Oh, okay. And so things can get kind of exciting that way.
So no one really holds all the power? It's really a balance of power.
It's a very precarious balance at any given time, and the balance shifts with politics and with the personalities. And whenever an ordinance was enacted to control development, people who wanted to get a house built or a subdivision built or something would go to the appeals board. And the appeals board had a history of coming up with very creative decisions that had nothing to do with the law.
Okay.
And I would notice when I went to town meetings, there was a woman there called Michelle Moody, who was a conservationist in town. She was on the Conservation Commission. And she'd get up and complain about the latest decision of the appeals board and say they'd just done something outrageous and crazy again, and everybody would just say, oh yeah, it's just Michelle complaining, it's the local greenie on the soapbox, ho-hum, you know, everybody has a yawn. And so I'd talk to a couple of people and I'd say, well, what gives, you know, is this woman telling the truth? Is she a pest? They're just blowing her off? Is she nuts? You know, what's going on? And I'd get contradictory answers, so I thought, and she'd be there every other week saying, they did it again, you know? So I said, well, there's only one way to find out, and that's do some real old-fashioned journalism and go digging in the files in town hall and look at the decisions that the appeals board have made over the past year and see if they make sense or not compared to the law. So that's what I did. I dug out about 50 or 60 files.
And it didn't make any sense.
And I found that what they were doing was they were coming up with the decisions they wanted to make and then developing the rationale to support the decision, which was really kind of wrong, illegal, and funny. And so I found about, I don't know, a dozen cases that had really questionable decisions. And I found them with quotes. You know, you go through the minutes, and I found quotes from various members of the appeals board, and a couple of beauties like, well, I really think we should grant this guy his variance, and we've just got to figure out a way to do it.
Oh, okay.
You know, on the record and on TV, and people weren't necessarily watching it, so I thought, this is great. This is great. I mean, this is smoking gun stuff at the local government level, so and this was while I was still at the York Weekly. And I said, so we got to do this. And the publisher was a little nervous. His name was Jim Carter at the time. But Jim, to his credit, said, yeah, okay, we should go for this. And,
yeah, I can imagine he would be nervous, because if you were raking up dirt on the local politicians, wouldn't that affect his newspaper?
Well, apparently nobody had done it before. I didn't realize this. I only knew one way to do my job, and that was the way I've been trained when I started in this business 37 years ago. Okay. And the way you go into it is you try and find out what's going on, and then you print it. It's not hard, you know. It shouldn't be hard. And so that's what I was doing. And when you find out something that's potentially highly embarrassing to a very senior board in a town, and also embarrassing to the municipal culture that has allowed that to take place for several years, then yeah, you know you're going to have an effect. You know there's going to be, something's going to happen. You're going to get a reaction. And you don't know what. That's the kind of exciting thing. You can't predict it. You know, perhaps, you know, makes you nervous. It's a scary thing. So,
so is that why they didn't rehire you then?
No, that had nothing to do with it. We can get there in a second, but that had nothing to do with it. This appeals board thing turned out to be one of the biggest stories of the year. And
I bet it was.
We did it as a two-parter, because one of the things that the appeals board did, which I thought was incredibly stupid, it was the stupidest thing they could have done. The smart thing to do, you know, when you get public officials on something, is they should come out and talk about it. And they could at least say, you know, and this is a free lesson to public officials anyway, because they still make the mistake. They should come out at the very least and say, we made a mistake and we're sorry, and it won't happen again, honest. Or we'll really try, you know, maybe people might believe them.
Or just admit that they made a mistake.
Or just admit that they're human or something, right. You know, admit that what was going on was wrong, it was lazy, whatever it was, you know, but just be honest about it. They didn't. They refused to comment on it as if it was all beneath them. And I guess maybe there was a little thought that if they wouldn't comment, we couldn't publish it. You know, and this was something that they don't understand journalism. You know, really all we're required to do is give people fair opportunity to comment. If they're so stupid that they won't take it, that's their problem. You know, and I was so adamant that they had to be given an opportunity to comment. We wrote to them, not once, but twice, saying that this was a very important issue and we really wanted to give them every opportunity to comment. They could comment in writing, they could write letters, they could, whatever format they wanted to
call you
respond
up,
to this.
Okay.
However they wanted to do it, we just wanted to make sure. And we kept getting these letters back saying they discussed it the first and the second times and decided that they really didn't want to say anything about it. They had nothing to say about it. So we went with these 12 cases, the first time, and we printed the correspondence between the newspaper and the appeals board, showing that we'd given them fair opportunity. And it just had an incredible effect. I mean, people were saying, somebody's told the truth, you know, I was like, hallelujah, somebody. This had been like a scandal that had been driving people nuts for years. They lived with this culture of highly questionable, highly dubious decisions sometimes, and they finally, it was out in the open. Somebody lifted the lid on it. And
why do you think you were the first reporter to do that, though, in York? Just because you were new to the area?
No, I think it was
your background as a newspaper man in New York?
I think it's because local newspapers tend to hire two types of people. Kids who are getting into the business to get a clippings file and then move on, or older people who are getting out of the business and just want an easy job to make some pocket money. I felt that I was in neither category. I felt I was still in my prime, you know? And it's unusual, I think, to get people who are still full of fire and brimstone and have experience, and I think the experience is very important, and the confidence, if you've got the experience, to know what you can do.
Well, not too much investigative reporting has really been done anymore by newspapers.
I guess it's limited. It's limited for a number of reasons. It's limited to it depends on the philosophy or the policy of the newspaper. If they want to go in for a particularly investigative type of journalism, it's a particular kind of journalism, Kelly, and it's a journalism that a lot of newspapers are uncomfortable with because they don't want to alienate advertisers.
Exactly, but your publisher at that time published your story.
He had the guts to do it.
Yeah, he did have the guts. Good for him.
Yeah, and I don't want to pretend that I was the first to do it. I mean, a journalist before me had wrote an article poking fun at tourists and the bad behavior when they came to town, and the local Chamber of Commerce went nuts, saying, this is our bread and butter, you can't do this. And advertisers pulled their advertising then, you know, and they came back after a while. They try and punish you by taking money away from you for a while. In this particular case, there were no businesses really affected. Some of the members of the appeals board had businesses, and maybe, I don't know, they might have tried to exert some pressure in terms of advertising. I really wasn't privy to that if it happened at the time. I only became privy to that kind of thing when I started my own paper. But that was a series, and then I had an expert, a guy who trained code enforcement officers and knew all about how appeals boards were supposed to operate, and he examined the cases. I basically had him do what the appeals board wouldn't do, look at the cases and give us comments. And he did, and he said some of the decisions were pretty peculiar.
So you did a very thorough investigation with
basic
experts
journalism.
backing you up.
Yeah, basic journalism, and it caused a sensation.
How long did it take you to do the story? from the time you began till the time it got published?
I was doing it part-time, probably for, I don't know, 4 or 5 or 6 weeks while doing other things until I gathered the information and went through the files and accumulated the information, and then typing it all out and being very, very careful to make sure that, you know, we had it all faithful and right. And you know, it was funny, there was another, it wasn't the only story, there was another story too, which I thought caused an overreaction, and this is part of one of the funny things, I guess, that happens in small towns. We had the town had a bidding process for stonemasons to renovate and rebuild a chimney in the old jail in York, which is the oldest standing British building left in North America. And it's
Oh, really?
a tremendous piece of history. And they had a bidding process, and 1 or 2 of the local stonemasons were excluded and felt that the bidding process had been rigged. And the town manager at the time was trying to run around and hush all this up and cover it up and try and stop this thing getting, which is another thing public officials do, which is
Put out
which is kind of a
fires.
mistake, is, yeah, they try and cover up.
Right.
They think, this is going to be awful if this gets out, so we'll cover it up, and everything will be fine. And it's not. The cover-up often becomes worse
Yes.
than the, you know, the thing that they're trying to cover up. And if you get them on the cover-up, they look twice as guilty and twice as stupid and twice as incompetent. So I had an image, you know, we've got a town hall. It's not a big fancy town hall like this one. We've got a little town hall. It's just a nice historic kind of federal building in York. And it's got a big front door, and it has these windows with shutters on each side of the door and upstairs. And I got this image of a French farce of the town manager running out of his office into this office here, upstairs, and into the different departments, saying, "You got to shut up. You got to shut. What's going to keep? You know, what's it going to take to you? And you can't talk about this." And so that's how I wrote it, and I described it as a French farce with this guy running around trying to keep a lid on all of this stuff, and apparently nobody done that before either, because it was poking fun at something that was really quite a small issue. I mean, no lives were at stake, no fortunes were going to be lost. It was just egos and a little bit of low-level political skullduggery and ineptitude going on, and it was fun to expose it as a farce, which is what it was. But the people involved didn't like being made fun of. I didn't realize this was making me pretty unpopular in some circles. It was making me popular with readers, but it wasn't making me very popular
With the town officials.
with town officials. And so when the paper was sold and I was fired, a lot of people in town government thought, great,
Why do you
he's
think,
gone.
Well, why didn't you think the new newspaper wouldn't hire you?
Oh, that was, I mean, that was just a shabby inside piece of newspaper politics. I didn't get along with the editor very well. You know, the publisher listened to me more than he listened to the editor. And they put these restrictions on me. They, you know, I'd just come back from this trip. I got off the plane. I was still jet lagged. And the editor said, okay, you've done a lot of good things for the newspaper, but you've also brought it into disrepute. You can't work at home anymore. You can't do this.
And
you
you brought
can't
into
do that.
disrepute because you came up with really great stories?
Apparently.
Trying to keep the government honest?
That had won an award from the Maine Press Association
Oh, did it?
for
Good
Best
for you.
Investigative Journalism of the Year, you know.
And they get rid of
And
you.
this brought the paper into disrepute.
Yeah,
you know.
interesting. Yeah.
So I shook my head. I said, no, I'm not going to live with these restrictions, and I left. And then these people, other people around the town said, this is awful, you know, this chain that bought this paper, that bought the York Weekly, doesn't have a very good name for publishing quality papers, you know. Why don't you publish a paper? You know, the town should have its own paper. Why don't you publish a paper? I said, sure, give me $200,000. They said, oh, no, we can't do that. We haven't got $200,000. And I said, well, that's what it's going to take, you know, just to get a paper started and financed for 2 to 3 years. And then you get some money from advertising rolling over in that time, but you've really got to have some money up front. And they said, no. And one of these guys said, how about I put the word out that you're going to start a new paper, and I'll see if anybody will subscribe to it, and we'll see if we get some subscriptions. What do you think the subscription price should be for a new paper? I said, well, I don't know. I've never run a newspaper before. I said, well, find out what it costs to print a newspaper. And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, whatever the other one charges for a year subscription is $25. We'll charge $25. So these friends of mine said, well, we'll get the word out, you know, and within a week I started getting checks for $25 to a newspaper that didn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, when I got something, and I found out that to print 1,000 copies of an 8-page tabloid newspaper would cost about $200. It's about $197 and change.
But you know, that says a lot about what people want.
Yeah.
I mean, the Courier or whatever, they use their newspapers as commodities, as you said, just to sell stuff with
They're
soft
advertising
news.
vehicles.
They're advertisings. But what people want, they want hard news.
They want the real goods.
They want what is going on in our
Yeah.
town. Yeah.
They want people to talk to them like they're adults, like they're real people, and don't treat them like irrelevant fools.
So that was a huge statement, and they wanted you.
I started getting checks for $500.
Oh wow, excellent.
Not just $25. I started getting checks for people saying $500. Hope this covers a couple of print bills. You know, I had a friend of mine said, "What does it cost to print your paper for a week?" And I told him. He said, "There,
Well, that
we'll
must
cover your print bill for a week."
Well, that must have motivated you quite a bit to have all that.
Oh, I thought it was fantastic. It was like a miracle happening, because this was part of the confluence of circumstances. You know, first of all, we had a much-loved newspaper that had been around for 110 years, suddenly gone into a corporation that had a bad reputation for producing shoddy newspapers. And we had a local community that wanted its own kind of journalism back, wanted its newspaper back, and we had somebody stupid enough to try and do it,
You.
which was me. So, because this is the other thing I've always thought, which is really hard about starting a newspaper in York. Other people had tried and failed, because
really?
York is overserviced with newspapers. York has something like 11 newspapers if you include
11
regionals.
independent news.
No, if you include regionals and nationals.
Okay.
You know, we have, at that time we probably only had 10 newspapers, and the York Weekly had a lock on the town. Anybody trying to come into York couldn't have got in. They couldn't have started a new newspaper, and they tried and failed. Others did try and fail. So suddenly you had, the York Weekly was no longer the York Weekly anymore. It had been taken away. It had been absorbed into this chain. And
They renamed it?
they kept it, they called it the York Weekly, but they took it from a tab to a broadsheet.
Okay.
And they started including news from all over the state. It was no longer just local news. And they dumped a lot of favorite writers, and they came out and made a lot of promises they didn't keep. You know, they told lies. They came out and told people lies. And they got caught out in those lies within about 6 months. And people were smart enough to figure out that, you know, this is what chains do. They come in and they tell lies, and they make promises they don't keep. We're going to give you a big, brighter new paper, and it's going to be shinier and better, and oh, you're going to love us, you know. And I guess some people fall for that, and some people don't. And so the decision had to be made quickly. Are we going to start a new paper or not? And I said, okay. And so when we started getting the money to pay the print bills, we did. And we had to work hard. But I worked, and I concentrated. I was lucky in getting, this is the other great thing. I mean, this really has to be said, that when you do something like this, that is kind of idealistic and foolhardy in nature, it is amazing how many people are inspired by that and come out and want to help you. They're inspired by an ideal, because we have so few ideals left in life. Everybody's out for the buck. Everybody's used to being screwed and get, you know, selfishness and greed, and they just, you know, we're used to being lied to and rolled over, and our wishes don't really matter. We're going to be massaged or manipulated, and we're going to take these products, and they're going to be good for us. And when somebody starts up with patently nothing, and is just trying to see if there's a market for this and see if it'll work, and there's a response and people come out, there's an incredible feel-good associated with it. Everybody who came to this was up. They thought, this is great. You know, even if this fails, I feel so good about doing this, about trying to do it. And I mean, I felt like I was at Jimmy Stewart and It's a Wonderful Life.
But you know, I mean, just the fact that you started on December 15th, which is the birth date for the Bill of Rights, and
Yeah, that's
protecting your freedom. Yeah. I mean, this was protecting the free press for York, because essentially they lost it when they fired you.
Yeah, they did. They did. They tried to steal my motto off the front. I call it the Independent Voice of the Yorks. And okay. Dave Morris, the publisher of the Courier papers, stole the motto, incorporated it, as if that would make a difference, you know. But it's typical of the sleazy stuff that they do, that, you know, to try and get an edge or something, you know. And all the little sleazy stuff, it didn't wash. Nobody fell for it. It didn't matter. It didn't make anybody difference. People compared the two. I mean, look, I mean, it's a shabby, grubby, little 8-page tab with lousy pictures. Yeah, I mean, it's dense text. But the first issue, I got the full text of a secret report on these incidents that occurred at committee meetings, where people got into a little bit of pushing and shoving contest. There was a little bit of physical stuff went on, and the town tried to hush it up, and they produced a secret report. And no way, we're not having secret reports in this town, so I got my hands on a copy of the report, and I published it in the first issue. And so, you know, people started paying 50 cents for this paper that was just a dream.
Chock full of good information that they need to know, right?
It was a beginning. It was a statement. It was a manifesto of we're here, first of all. We stand for something, and we're going to go somewhere, and we're going to do stuff.
Now, this was a weekly. You came out with this oh, that's right, December 15th.
Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday it comes out.
We're coming out with it every Wednesday.
And you never missed one.
Actually, we did. We missed the Christmas. I took the Christmas off. I came down with the flu. I actually need to get better, but I planned on taking the Christmas off anyway. I took a little break, and we had that 1 week off over Christmas week of '99, and then we were back on like January the 2nd or 3rd, and we haven't missed an issue since. This
must be really hard. I mean, very intense, getting a paper out every single week.
Yeah, it's
covering
a grind.
the stories. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, the physical grind, and nobody got paid for the first 5 months. I mean, we got no money. I don't know how we did it. I don't know how we survived. Nobody got any money. I mean, I started Virginia. She started working for nothing. I was working for nothing. We did it for nothing. I took the pictures, and even though the pictures were bad to start with, sometimes they were worse after they came out of the print job.
But look at how the papers.
But it was meant to happen. I just really was. Meant to happen.
So now this is the paper now, a year later, less than it, no.
2 years
later.
2
years later.
Yeah.
And it's much thicker. It went from what, 8 pages to?
8 pages to 24 now. We're regularly 24, and some weeks we're 28.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really great. You got that, Linda? And then you even have a color picture now, too.
Yeah, we had our first color issue a couple of months back. We can do color, we can do anything. It's only money.
But you get the money. People support the newspaper.
Well, we're starting to get a bit more money. If you look through, we're getting more advertising. It's great. It's great.
And how's the other paper doing?
They've changed hands. They sold out. Courier sold them out to Seacoast Newspapers, which is owned by the Portsmouth Herald in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is in turn owned by the Wall Street Journal. And it just continues to be a more generic, bland newspaper with regional news and ads from all over the county. And it doesn't have that York feel anymore. It's not the York paper anymore.
So this is the York paper?
Yeah.
The York Independent?
Yeah.
This is the people's paper?
And that's what people say now. We've established ourselves as the profile of, without a doubt, we're the local paper. Mm-hmm. And from here, you know, we've gone from selling, I think our first issue, I printed 1,000, we sold something like 460 copies. You know, we now print about 2,000, 2,100. We sell about 2,000, 1,900, 2,000 copies
every week.
Paid.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, we shrink back in the winter because the town, you know, everything falls back in the winter. But if we can keep building at this rate, you know, we will be at where the old York Weekly was after 100 years. We'll be there in about 5 years, 5 or 6 years.
Keeping the government honest. Now, Are there other newspapers, do you know of, in Maine that are like this, that are really, you know, hardcore news, keep the government honest, tell the people what's happening in their town?
Oh yeah, there's a couple, thank God, because I had to go somewhere for advice. Because even though I'd been in journalism for many years, it was a type of journalism, it wasn't this type, we had to do everything. You know, we had to become a businessman and a publisher. I'd never been a publisher before. And there's a business and a legal aspect to that that you have to be aware of. And there, you know, we had to incorporate, and there were traps you could fall into. It would be easy to make mistakes. And so I would call upon other independent publishers, one of which is the state's oldest independent newspaper, and it's the Ellsworth American. The publisher up there is a man called Alan Baker. He's a wonderful man. And I would call him up and ask for advice. I'm having this happen, I'm having that happen, I'm not sure what to do. You know, I'm tempted to do this, what do you think? And he would give me, you know, if I saw unfair competition, if the competition was trying to take advertisers away and offering them deals and stuff like this, stuff that I couldn't compete with, you know, I'd say, what do we do in a case like this? And his advice was always steady. He would say, stick to your knitting. Just keep doing what you're doing. Put out a better paper. It doesn't matter that it doesn't have fancy pictures and fancy this, and you know, it's not always clean and perfect and pristine every week. People will see that this is where the substance is. This is the meat and potatoes. This is where they're going to get the real information. And that's the reputation we got from the start. If you really want to know what's going on in York, that's the paper you get.
But we don't have many papers like this anymore.
No, another one was the Waldo Independent up in Belfast, serves Waldo County. Tony Mello is the publisher up there, and I would call her. And you know, they were great. They would say it's really hard. It's hard work, but the satisfaction, there's nothing like it. Because every week you feel as if you're doing something important and something relevant. And how many jobs give you the opportunity to do that?
It feels so good. And not be controlled.
Freedom is great.
Freedom is great.
Freedom is wonderful, you know, and it's a dangerous, scary commodity, because if you're not careful, you know, you don't want to slander people, you don't want to defame people, you don't want to abuse your freedoms, you do not want to abuse the power you have. Unfortunately, a lot of publishers don't abuse the power they have, they debase it. They sell the paper short, they don't aim high, they aim low. You know, they sell out, they turn the papers into nothing more than flyers, basically, shoppers. You know, they're just glorified shoppers, a lot of them, and they don't want to rock the boat. And that's because they're in it for the buck. They're in it for the bottom line. The bottom line is God. It rules everything, the profit motive. They just want the money. You can make a lot of money in publishing if, you know, you follow certain formulaic rules, and you build up a readership over certain areas, and you discount your ads, and you do this and do that. Yeah, you can make money, but are you really doing what newspapers were intended to do, which is to give people information that they can use to make the important decisions of their lives, on whether the government is really being honest with them, whether the government is governing them properly. You know, if they're going to have to vote these clowns out, they want to know that they're doing it legitimately. You know, and if they're being lied to, they want to know if they're being lied to. And if they're being patronized, they want to know if they're being patronized, and most of the time they are being patronized. People are just saying, don't worry about it, it's all under control. Your government is doing a great job, we do this for you, we do that for you, don't worry, just go back to paying your taxes, everything will be fine. The tax rate keeps going up, and people start thinking, I don't know.
That's right. Now, would you ever work for a larger newspaper like the Press Herald? It would be a different experience, wouldn't it?
I don't see any point at this stage in my life. I'll leave this and go back to writing books. Writing books is what excites me as much as this. I've got a number of books that I want to write, that I still have to write. It's just the greatest challenge. There's a huge amount of satisfaction doing that. I love the independence of writing books. I will return to writing books when I leave this.
But you're not going to leave this for a while, right?
No, I want this to go on for another 100 years.
Okay.
I want to hire an editor, and I do 3 jobs at the minute, 3.5 jobs. I'm the publisher, the editor, the town reporter, and I stick the labels on the subscriber copies every Wednesday morning at the post office. I want to get the printer to take over the labeling for me. I want to hire an editor to take over and do the editing and so forth. I think I have to stick with town reporting for a while because, to a large extent, I'm afraid, I have the local knowledge now of the history of the town because I've been doing this nearly 4 years. And that gives me a tremendous edge over the other paper now, which has had just this tremendous turnover of people through it. And they don't know
They don't know the town, they don't know the history of the politics. Yeah.
They don't know the history of the politics. They miss important stuff. We had a classic example. They didn't get the point of that, our front page lead this week. They just didn't see it. They didn't see the implications of that. And the people who've lived in the town 30, 40 years, their whole lives, they know. And they know when they're getting a substandard product. And, they get it for the legal notices or for the school photographs and this kind of stuff, but they're not getting what they really want and deserve. When you give people what they want, they'll respond.
Do you have kids from the local college calling up to be an apprentice? I mean, this is really a great way to learn the newspaper.
I have now from the local high school. I've got a young man called Jared Avery who's an editorial intern for us, and he's great. He is, and this sounds awfully stuck up and snobbish, but I'd rather he came to our paper where at least we start him off with an ideal, rather than going to a paper where you're told, don't worry about this, don't worry about that, don't do that, don't rock the boat. Or just where they get lazy, the readers don't care. They don't really need all that. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
So I'd rather we had these interns. I get kids job shadowing us now, because the newspaper has the reputation in the community of standing for something.
Now, obviously the people of the town just love the newspaper. What about the school system? I mean, obviously if they're sending kids your way to, for apprenticeship, they must love your newspaper too.
You've got to be respectable, and the way you stay respectable is the truth has to be the truth. You can't make things up. You can't. We have slow weeks. We have slow weeks. There's no big headlines. You can't just put a big sensational, headline, "Elvis ate my baby," because you want to sell papers this week, or whatever would be the local equivalent, exaggerating an issue that really doesn't merit exaggeration. You do that at a local level, you're dead. You're dead. You can't do that very often at all, because I have to see everybody in town. I'm accountable. I walk around the town, and people see me. They see me in the stores. They see me at the gas station. They can come into the office, and they can tell me whether they agree with the story or whether they think I blew it this week or not. And I take pride in when people come in. Nobody's told me I blew it, but I have had people say, "I think you were too hard on somebody this week. I think you went too hard on this particular issue." And I'm always ready to defend my reasons why, and if having defended my reasons why, in that exercise itself, I might start to think, maybe I was a little harder than I needed to be on this person this week. You're right. I might see. So I've had a learning curve here too, because of that responsibility to the people. In a big newspaper, if you think the mayor's a crook, you can write a story saying the mayor's a crook, and he might get investigated and lose his job. You don't have to see him again. In a small town, if you say somebody's a crook, you're going to be facing that guy for a long time. So you better be right. And more importantly, you'd better merit ruining this man's career. You're not doing it just to score brownie points for yourself so your career is going somewhere. I really want this paper to stand for something. I don't have to worry about my career and win awards and say, I want to go on and be a big shot reporter on a big city daily. I've been a big shot reporter on a big city daily, and it was great, but it was a long time ago. As I said, the natural step for that was actually I went to magazines and then books. what has been great for me is at my age, and I'll be 55 in January, is learning what journalism is really all about again. Because when I first went into journalism, I went into big city dailies where they often were corrupt. They were just marketing oriented. You know, I went into journalism in the 60s, and in the early 60s, and I remember when a really bad thing happened. It was when they took the marketing manager out of the basement office next door to the circulation manager, who was next door to the press room, and put him up next door to the managing editor and said, we're going to find out what people want to read, and we're going to give it to them. And if people want happy stories, we're going to give them happy stories. And if we need to be catering to the 18 to 35 demographic because that's where the most disposable income is, we're going to tailor stories in our journalism to that demographic. And that stank. That was the beginning of the rot in journalism. And that's what people are getting. Still to this day, I don't think many of them realize, they're getting a type of journalism on the big city dailies that are tailored to them by demographics, by markets. You know, you're segmented as a market, and the stories you're getting are not the stories of what really matters, of what's going wrong and what's going on and what's being hidden. You're being marketed stuff that's supposed to matter to you, like, well, transportation is a big issue, or housing price is a big issue. You know,
But they're not giving people information that they need to know to make good decisions about their lives.
the fundamentals. The fundamentals. We just got so far away from the fundamentals of giving people that information, because when you live in a community, you can have a direct say in what happens to you. If enough of you decide that your town is spending too much money on this or that, and they want to say no to that, and they get good information, then they will trust you and they will say no. They'll vote something down. You know, we had in our May election, the town wanted to get a new $6 million town hall built, and it got voted down.
That's great.
Because people felt that they were making, I think, an informed decision. We didn't stand either way on that. We just reported it.
But when you do that, though, that, you know, in every town you have your power grabbers. And when things are reported in the newspaper, they really don't want that information being reported because that gives them less power.
Yeah, there's a lot of ego. Some of the power is in money. You know, I've had people who felt that their livelihoods were, and sometimes it's just political ideology. You know, you get perceived a certain way. I think because we had a growth cap come in last year, and the paper took a very pro-growth cap position editorially, not, and by that I mean in our editorial column, not in the news pages. And people have to understand in that distinction, you can only present the point of view of the newspaper as being your personal editorial position, your personal political view in the editorial column, because that's just opinion, that's all it is. And people can either not read it or discount it. They can disregard it, disagree with it, they're free to do that.
Or they can also write the editor to give their opinion.
And we publish it, and we take pride in publishing opposite opinions. In the news pages, you have an absolute obligation just to play it straight, down the middle. Tell it like it is, this is the information, you make your mind up. And just by virtue of us taking a position that we thought the town should have a growth cap so it could have a breather and create a new zoning ordinance to decide what the character of the town should be, whether it should just become another suburb or if it should try and preserve some of its local integrity, some of its local history and its local historic look, which was what people were moving there for anyway, and swamping it. They were loving the town to death. And so they brought in a growth cap that limited the number of homes that could be built per year to 84. There were some people who felt that we were wrong to say that we supported that, and they set out to hurt the paper, you know, by telling people not to advertise with us and so forth. There were a few attempts at intimidation of me, you know, to try and bring pressure to me, to bear on me personally, and it didn't work. There was no chance it could. It was beyond my comprehension that these people thought they could.
So they were threatening you.
Well, yeah.
Way.
I mean, threats are strong. Because I never took it seriously because what were they going to do, kill me? I didn't think they were willing to go that far. You know, maybe I was naive, but I didn't think anybody was willing to go that far. I wasn't impressed by their bluster, and I wasn't impressed by their point of view.
So it's been 2 years, so how does the selectman, the mayor of the town, is it a mayor or a manager?
We have a town manager, and we have a 5-member board of selectmen.
Okay. And how do they respond to you and to what
The
you're
town manager, he and I had several shootouts. I mean, we've had many big falling outs. And it's only about 3 months since I wrote a couple of editorials that saying that he should get out of town. He's doing a lousy job. We should throw him out, you know.
So obviously, he doesn't like you, okay.
Well, he's being very nice to me now.
Oh, is he?
He's actually being very nice to me now, but that could have something to do with the fact that his contract's coming up for review.
Ah, okay. And what about the selectmen?
The previous Board of Selectmen weren't too happy with me. The current Board of Selectmen is probably a bit better.
Were you responsible for any of them not being reelected?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's good.
Yeah.
We should have more people like you in every town in Maine.
Well, as long as people realize they're free to agree or disagree, and you know, it's not rocket science. It really isn't, and it still surprises me that just printing a newspaper that delivers the straight goods is seen as a revolutionary concept. And that, unfortunately, just shows how far adrift this country's got from the principles on which it was founded.
Absolutely.
You know, which, let's face it, there were principles. It's very hard to stick to principles in the face of, you know, money and greed and opportunity, and a lot of people can't do it. But by God, they appreciate it when they see the real goods, and they appreciate what they've lost. There's a little bit of that, you know. It's not a highly glossy, highly refined, polished product. We don't win a lot of awards. We don't win any awards for our design, for our look, or our pretty pictures. You know,
the
like
substance. That's...
Yeah, the other chains, you know, they go for the fancy pictures, they go for the design look, and they think they're great. They call themselves the best newspaper of the year because they look pretty. You know, that's crap. That's crap. To me, what really, I'd love to have a pretty paper as well, but I'd rather put the money and the resources and the time and the effort into delivering what people want,
Yeah,
real
and
information.
what they need to know and keeping the government on. Are there any other towns around you, like what's besides York, Wells, Kittery, Algonquin? Do they show any interest in starting an independent newspaper of their own?
No, the chain which acquired the York Weekly also acquired the York County Coast Star, and that pretty well serves the county of York and those towns.
But they're not
Wells,
giving us the
Algonquin.
information that we need to know. They're giving us, they're marketing stuff to us.
Yeah, it's a lot of pap, you know. I don't want to be too hard on a lot of the good people who go to these newspapers. You know, there's a lot of people who they're the only jobs they can get in journalism, and they take it, and they don't particularly feel the most comfortable there, but they do it because they want to be in journalism, and
Well, maybe they can start their own newspaper.
and maybe they can, and you know, there are a number of those people that I think they're very competent, they're very capable people, and they would like to write stuff, and they do. Some of these other newspapers, they do serious journalism from time to time. I don't know why they can't make a habit of it.
From time to time.
Yeah, because I think most journalists, if it was economic for them to do so, economically feasible for them to do so, they'd much rather work on a free paper, you know, a paper where they're free to tell the truth.
Well, the independent press, we've got to really push that. I think public access is the same thing. Go to a mainstream media television show, and you just can't quite tell the truth all the time, or it's
don't rock the boat.
Don't rock the boat, or it's manipulated.
Don't offend anybody.
Don't offend anybody.
Whatever you do, don't
right.
offend anybody. There might be somebody out there, sitting with earmuffs on or whatever, and with stranger, and you might offend them, and we don't want to do that, because they might cancel a subscription.
Might lose our advertisement.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's incredible. You were talking though about doing your own public access show, maybe.
I saw that as an extension of the newspaper because we have public access in York, and it's very well watched. A lot of people can't get to the selectmen's meetings, the town meetings, and the important committee meetings, but they do watch them very, very assiduously. And it's fun. We did a feature on this. We called it like a local soap opera, a local political soap, because, and that's the way I saw it. The Monday night selectmen's meeting was like, it was like an ongoing soap opera where you'd have subplots building to a climax, and you'd have the sweeps, which would be the election, you know, twice a year, and you'd see which personalities got behind which causes and how much they were sticking the neck out. And so-and-so's friendship or relationship with somebody had been fractured, you know, they'd been friends for years, and one turned on the other over this particularly hot issue. And so people were tuning into this political soap and watching it with their eyes glued to the screen. And in a way, we were kind of the local soap opera digest. You know, we were the local print version of that reported this hot
drama,
political soap opera that was going on a weekly basis, or weekly episodes. And I thought, you know, there's an opportunity here for the York Independent to have a weekly half-hour show where we could just invite on one or two people and talk about the political issue of the week, and they could do a little more explanation. I don't want them to come on and beat them up, but I do want them to come on and tell the truth, you know, and come on and don't hedge and hum and haw and say, you know, why are you doing this? Isn't this too much money, or why, you know, are you doing this now just because you know, you want to take control of the budget committee, or something like that, you know? And he said, like, what? You can't say that. You know, I'm totally sincere, you know, about politics is about egos much of the time. Sometimes it's all about egos, and I don't want to run down the people who get into it with genuine motivation for doing good. A lot of them are. But, you know, they're often the ones who get chewed up by the cynical political manipulations and games that go on, and they just get disheartened after a year or two of knocking themselves out and not being able to accomplish anything. So I think it's very, very important to take the cynicism out of local politics and put the idealism back into it.
That's excellent. Well, I hope you do start your show. That'll be wonderful. So you have these books that you wrote. Before you got into, well, you were a newspaper man, and then you went to magazines, and then you wrote books. Tell us something about these books.
Well, I started out, the one you're holding up, Season of the Monsoon, is a murder mystery set in India. And that one was dear to my heart because I wanted to write a book. First of all, when you approach authorship, one of the things that is made very clear to you if you're going to have an agent is that you've got to try and write a book that will sell. So if you're going to write, unless you write nonfiction and you've got a great story to tell, if you're going to write fiction, you really need to pick a format, like mysteries or thrillers or something, in which you can tell the story that you want to tell. And really, you know, people have to want to read it. You really have an obligation, again, I think, to make the book readable. It should be entertaining. It should be enjoyable. You don't want to sermonize to people in a novel. You just don't. So I had what I thought would be an idea for I thought it was a great idea for a novel. I was very interested in at the time in India as an example of a place where there were no laws, because it's a very chaotic society.
Have you ever been there?
Oh yeah, I went there to research all the books.
Okay. Good investigator.
Sure, oh, you got to go there. And I was very lucky in my research. I got some great breaks on it. I've always been interested in this idea of corruption and how people become corrupt and why they become corrupt, how they drift into corruption, how they sell themselves out, how they sell their ideals out.
That is an interesting topic,
you know?
yeah.
And I was interested in the notion of what is the most corrupt society on earth? Where's the toughest place in the world to be an honest cop? And I thought, India. And it interested me because I was born and I grew up in England, and part of our history lessons were on the British Empire and the British acquisition of India. And I remember once in a school history lesson hearing this nightmarish scenario whereby, this little country with a highly militaristic attitude at the time in the 1700s had gone out and with great leadership at the time and a certain amount of courage and determination, conquered this much bigger country in a series of pretty successful military actions, and then they had to administer it. They had to administer a country that was 20 times their size with 50 times their population. And so they were sending out people from the British Isles, and they were really scraping the bottom of the barrel. They were really sending out third and fourth rate public officials to India to administer districts where these people would become Rajas. They'd live in the Raja's palace, they'd kill the Raja, thrown him out of a job, whatever, and they'd take over the palace. And they'd put in these fourth rate public officials, and they'd have, a regiment of cavalry or troops, whatever, and they'd have the power of life and death over the local population. And I thought that was horrific, because I'd been used to seeing public officials in Britain that had too much power, and they were awful. Just try getting a driving license off some of them, or getting something at town hall or wherever, people with an exaggerated sense of their own importance. And they can make your lives hell for nothing, getting a dog license, If you tick somebody off one day, they'll get back at you by not giving you a dog license, some real petty stuff. And I thought, wow, if you take that pettiness and apply it on an enormous scale and give people a life and death powers, that's awful. Big powers require, large powers require large skills and large responsibilities. You've got to have capable people to do that. And so I had these crimes in the past where a corrupt public official committed a series of murders and got away with it. And here in the present day, a series of similar murders take place, identical to these murders that took place 100 years before.
Oh, wow.
And we have our hero, a detective, who's a blue-eyed Anglo-Indian detective called George Sandsey, who he is then put in the position of solving these present-day murders and these past murders, and trying to bring justice to the lowest members of society, the lowest caste members of society, and basically in the world.
Well, you're a man of justice, who's interested in justice. Well, you are. Newspaper man, keeping government honest. Paper was born on the Bill of Rights birthday. Trying to figure out what makes people corrupt. I think that's fascinating. We only have a couple of minutes left, though. And you believe the time went by so quickly. And these books here are a continuation of the story?
Yeah, the Ganja Coast was a sequel, and The Burning Ghats was also a sequel. There were two books which followed it. And I plan to write a fourth at some point. And as I said when we were talking before, I get fan letters from people saying, "What's George Sandsey's next case? What's happening? When are we going to write another book?" And I do want to write a fourth book. I've got a number of different types of books that I want to write. But I do want to write another Sandsey novel. And
now, can you get this at Borders?
You still can get some of them. They're nearly out of print. I mean, they've been successful enough to the point they're out of print. But the publisher canceled my book contract a couple of years ago. I think about 4 years ago, which is why I went back into journalism. I was burned out on the books, and I went into journalism thinking it would be a vacation. And I think you can, but most of them are out of print unless they go to reissue. But that's great for me. I mean, if we get a flood of people ordering them, yeah, they'll go to reprint.
Excellent. And then you also, you wrote a lot of books.
Yeah.
And you have, but these two aren't a sequel, or they don't have anything to do with the other two?
No, they're techno thrillers. And they were written before the murder mysteries. And I just decided that I wanted to write a couple of fun books. And they're real guy books, They're guns and bombs and great machines and one-man submarines and super guns, and they're Tom Clancy, James Bond type novels. And I just had a blast doing it, an absolute blast.
Well, I kind of thought you'd be a man of adventure there. We're all out of time. It's been an absolute pleasure Thank you for coming,
Well,
Paul.
thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Now, Paul, I'm sure, would be willing to talk to any wonderful reporter who would like to start their own independent newspaper to keep all of Maine honest. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.